Welcome to POPI for Leaders. This training presentation is aimed at managers and executives, and for those who need to have a higher level and deeper level of understanding of the POPI Act and data privacy in general. One of the most common questions I get asked is, what actually is compliance with the POPI Act? There's been lots of talk about compliance. There are people saying you must get compliant, or you must achieve compliance, or you can purchase a POPI pack to bring about compliance in your business. But let's unpack what compliance actually is. The Protection of Personal Information Act defines 8 conditions. And what it says is, these 8 conditions prescribe the minimum threshold requirements for the lawful processing of personal information. Or, another way of looking at it would be, if you don't meet these 8 conditions, you're not lawfully processing personal information. And even if you do, these are the minimum standards. These are not the objectives. This is not the goal. This is not the gold standard to shoot for. But if you do manage to achieve those, you then have to, as being the responsible party, is ensure that the conditions and all the measures that give effect to such conditions are complied with. So, to help you understand that a bit better, I want you to think about an archery target, looking a bit like this. Now, there's many ways to score when it comes to archery, and each ring has different levels of points. But the objective, the target, is the bullseye. The bullseye is where we want to be. That's where we score maximum points. And the way we'll achieve maximum points when it comes to POPI compliance is by understanding the principles that underpin and overarch POPI and data privacy as a concept. The POPI Act is a principles-based document. It does not contain many rules and regulations. As a result, it's vitally important to understand the principles, because only from the principles can you understand the principles behind POPI and the principles contained within it. So that's our objective. Let's try and grasp the principles. Even if we don't quite grasp the principles and we fall a little bit short, well, that's still not so bad, because if we fall short of the principles, we will still land and achieve the conditions. And remember, if we do achieve the 8 conditions of POPI, well, that's our objective overall anyway. It may not be our long-term objective where we really want to be, but it's a pretty good start. Now, the conditions of POPI will be brought about by the measures that give effect to the conditions. And the measures are things like, for example, projects and policies. By undertaking these projects and policies, these will bring the conditions to life. And life is where we want to be. POPI is a living, breathing document, a living, breathing piece of legislation, as is your business. So we want to make sure that the measures we are bringing into effect are sustainable and work well. How we do that is straightforward. We will produce and we will use a range of tools. The tools are procedures and templates which help you implement the measures. And remember, the measures give effect to the conditions, and the conditions derive from the principles. And I'll give you a range of tools, because any good toolkit needs a variety of tools. Because the tools you have need to be used for a variety of actions. And the actions are the tasks and uses that you use the tools for. Remember, tools are only effective if you use the right tool for the right job. Screwdrivers do not make very good hammers. Hammers do not make very good saws. And if the only tool you have is a hammer, well, then everything else looks like a nail. So let's make sure we understand what the right tools are so we can give the correct actions, to give effect to the correct measures, which will allow the conditions to flourish for our principles to take root in. So let's start at the beginning. Well, it's not really a beginning because, in essence, all of the principles that fall within data privacy are important. However, I would like to think that accountability, while not being more important, is at least first among equals when it comes to importance. And so there is certainly nothing more important than accountability. So let's spend a little bit of time understanding and unpacking what accountability actually is. In the Act, it actually says the following. Now, bear with me, it's quite a mouthful. This is actually one sentence, albeit 4 lines. And it says, the responsible party must ensure that the conditions set out in this chapter and all the measures that give effect to such conditions are complied with at the time of the determination of the purpose and means of the processing and during the processing itself. Now, that is quite a lot to get your head around. So, to save you the pain, I've done it for you. In other words, what accountability really means is you're the responsible party, must demonstrate that you are complying with all aspects of the Act for the duration of the personal information life cycle. Now, I know you're going to ask me now, what is the personal information life cycle? We'll come to that in a second. But in its simplest form, you have to prove that you are POPI compliant for as long as you're processing personal information. Easy. If you can't, then you are already falling foul of the accountability concept, and accountability is the first condition of the 8 of POPI. Which means if you can't be accountable, you will not and cannot stay compliant with POPI. The key thing in my mind with accountability, guys, is this. It doesn't just stop once you've determined whether you are or not. You must continue this during the processing. Your business will always be processing data. Therefore, you must always comply with POPI, and therefore you are always accountable for always complying with POPI. To help you digest that a little bit more, there's a concept I want to bring to your attention. And rather than reinvent the wheel, I like to use ideas and concepts that have already been tried and tested elsewhere. And data protection by design and by default is one of those. You may possibly have heard the shorter version of this, which is called privacy by design. Privacy by design has been with us for many years and was originally first coined by the Information Commissioner for Canada. Canada has some very robust and very effective data privacy legislation and has been operating successfully for many years. So I like to use these 7 principles as a good starting point to get your head around what data privacy is and how we can best utilize it in our space with POPI. There are 7 elements to privacy by design, and we'll go through them very briefly and then unpack them in more detail. The first one is life cycle protection. Then we have preventative and not remedial, making it the default setting, embedding in design, keeping it user-centric, visibility and transparency, and fully functional. If we can achieve these 7 things, we will go a very long way to making your business a POPI-friendly environment. More importantly, these thoughts, these concepts will help guide your thinking. Remember, it's principles-based, not rules-based. Absorb these principles, understand where they're coming from, and think, how can we apply these? How do these show up in my space? So let's start with the one we talked about in the slide before, when we talked a bit about accountability, and that is the personal information life cycle. So as the accountability condition explains to us, we are accountable for something during the personal information life cycle. Well, let's unpack what that is. So we all have tons of data. Data is basically ones and zeros sitting in digital format in our computers, in our devices, in our storage units, everywhere. Now, as a 1 and a 0, a 1 and a 0 is just data and isn't, strictly speaking, personal information. A 1 and a 0 is no different from any other 1 and a 0. But once we extract that data and do something with it, we have now created information. And that act of creation imposes an obligation upon us. Once you create something, you are now accountable for it. Now, that act of creation, it might just be a document, a spreadsheet, an Excel file, it might be a PowerPoint presentation, or even a training video. But once you have created it using people's personal information, you are now accountable for it. And you are accountable for that information during its whole life cycle. And there are many stages to a piece of information life cycle, and let's unpack what they are. So you've created something, you're now accountable for it. First thing you should probably do is make sure you save it somewhere nice and secure, because again, as the accountable person, you need to make sure that you are keeping that information safe and secure. So you give it a file name, possibly even a version name, and then you'll save it somewhere on a shared drive or on a hard drive or on your laptop or on a USB, because you want to keep working on it or using it for other purposes. And that usage can be in a variety of formats. It may just stay in the format you created. You may use it in multiple formats. You may decide to start using it as a PowerPoint, as an Excel document, as a Word document. It may be a multifunctional document using all of the above. But you're going to be using it. And while it's in use, again, you are accountable for keeping it safe and secure. Why? Because you're using people's personal information. And therefore you have an accountability for it. Remember, you created the thing in the first place. As you start completing your work, you might decide you want to start sharing with other people. In fact, that might have been your purpose all along, which is perfectly fine, as long as, again, you remember that you are accountable for your method of transmission and sharing, who you share it with, and what conditions you impose upon them for having it. If you don't tell someone not to share this information with somebody else, well, you can't be that surprised if they do. On the other hand, if you're giving an interview to a reporter and you wanted to keep it off the record, well, then you should say that beforehand, not afterwards. But sharing the information, remember, you're accountable for sharing it. It's your information that you created. Once you've shared it with all the people you need to share it with, and you've had their feedback, and you've had their thoughts, and you've had their praise and comments and criticisms, you might decide, well, okay, it's served its purpose now. So let me store it away somewhere nice and safe so I don't have to worry about it anymore. And you archive it. Now, you may not archive it properly, you may not stick it in a hardened bunker or vault somewhere, or stored away in the cloud in perpetuity. It may just live on your shared drive, or in your laptop, or on your cell phone, or in a USB stick. But wherever it is, wherever it's stored, wherever it's archived, again, that's your accountability. You put it there, you created the thing, it's yours. Keep it safe. Because you have to keep data safe once you created it. Once you've created that information, it's now your accountability. And it will stay your accountability forever unless you do one final thing, which is to destroy that data. Until you destroy the data is your accountability. Now remember, we don't want to destroy the data itself because the data is useful, the ones and the zeros. That might be handy for research purposes and statistics and such like. But we want to destroy the file, the document, the information that we created from the data. Once we do that, you are no longer accountable for it. You can forget all about it. It's no longer your problem. So guys, this is the personal information life cycle. The moment you create, you are accountable until you destroy. Accountability is very important. We discussed that earlier. You are accountable throughout the personal information life cycle. As long as you are creating, saving, using, sharing, archiving, or doing a whole host of other processes, you are accountable for that information. So let's move on to the next element of privacy by design, which is being preventative, not remedial. Now, think back to what your granny used to tell you when you were growing up. Much of what she said predated the information age, yet strangely is of great value. You may have heard the old expression, a stitch in time saves 9. Yeah, well, it's true. In fact, nowadays it's actually more, a stitch in time saves 10. But the principle's sound. There's a concept in data science, and it's called the 1-10-100 principle. And it's a very straightforward, simple principle, but it's very wise and it helps you understand many things around data privacy. So what does it talk about? Well, imagine there's a cost to doing something, and that cost can be a time cost, it can be a work cost, it can be a financial money cost, it can be a reputational cost. There's always a cost to doing something. And let's just say the cost of doing something is 1. And in this instance, the one thing we want to do is prevent. We want to prevent there being a problem. Why? Because prevention is better than remediation. How much better? Well, if we don't prevent something happening, and yes, there's always a cost of prevention, but the cost of prevention is 10 times less than the cost of correction. So let that sink in. Before you start thinking, yeah, well, I don't really want to do this because it's going to be expensive. It's far more expensive if you don't. Let me give you a simple example that we can all understand. Imagine you're trying to send an email with a contract to a new client or a potential new client. If you are smart and diligent and concerned about data privacy and keeping information safe and secure, when that person gave you their email address, you might want to just double check to make sure you spelt it correctly. Would there have been a cost to that? Yes, it would have taken you an additional 10 or 20 seconds just to double check you had the correct email address. Was it worth it? Well, imagine you hadn't double checked, and now as you're typing the email address, you get it wrong. Or you type it correctly, just you wrote it down wrong in the first place. And now you craft a lovely email, you attach the document you wanted to send, and you send it through to the person. Only to discover a few moments later, you get another message back saying, message not delivered. And now you go, oh, crikey, what do I need to do? So first thing you do is you look at the email you sent, and then you find the original email address you had, and you look at it and go, hang on, it's correct. It's exactly right. It must be a mistake. And then you spend a few minutes trying to track down who it was who gave you the email address in the first place. And then you have to try and find another way of contacting them. You might send them a WhatsApp or a phone or a message, or give them a phone call, or wander around the building until you can find them again. And then you correct the error, and you get the correct email address. And this time you then go back to your desk, you sit back down, and you recompose the email that you sent the first time round. And this time you double and triple check to make sure that you've got the email address exactly correct, and then you send it. Now, that's not the end of the world, but I think we can all agree it's time consuming, lots of time and effort, money, and you look a bit silly because you couldn't even get the email address correct in the first place. It doesn't bode well for the contract or the document you just sent to that person. Either way, you've spent a considerable amount of time more on correcting the problem than the actual problem in the first place, which could have been prevented just by a quick double check. Now, that's the good news. If you did manage to correct it, wonderful. But imagine you couldn't. Imagine you didn't have any other point of contact for the person you're trying to get a hold of. The reason they gave you the email address is because that's their preferred method of contact. You may not have a phone number. You may not be able to ever get a hold of that person ever again. In which case, what are you going to do with that lovely contract that's just sat there? And the cost of failing to get that contract could be enormous. Because that's what we're talking about, is preventing failure. Failure is at least 10 times more expensive than the cost of correction, and at least 100 times more expensive than preventing the error in the first place. Let's prevent the problem before it becomes a problem, because the clear up afterwards is far, far, far more time consuming. And that's an awful lot of what compliance is about. It's preventing the problem from occurring, not dealing with the aftermath from it. Again, another old saying, don't shut the door after the horse has bolted. How can we do that? Well, let's move on to the next element. Let's try and make privacy within our business what's called the default setting. What do we mean by default? Well, default means that if an individual actually does nothing, their privacy still stays intact. They haven't had to do anything extra or additional to keep their privacy safe, because it's already there. It's built in. It's integral. It's part of the system, the setting, the design of the entire thing. And that also applies to you. If you don't have to do anything over and above what's already there, then you don't have to worry about protecting their privacy any way, shape, or form either. Okay? Make it the default. Have it built in. And if it's built into the system by default, then you never have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about privacy. You don't have to worry about problems because it's already there. Make it part of the system. Make it systemic. If it's not systemic, it'll be casual or ad hoc, or on a case-by-case basis, or as required. And we all know that if you do things as and when, or as required, or on a case-by-case basis, every so often there'll be cases that don't get the attention they require. So the best way to avoid all these problems is make it the default setting. How we can do that? Well, we can embed it into the design of the systems or the processes or the practices that we are undertaking. Let's rather build it in. There are some good examples of this in areas that have nothing to do with data privacy or even information. If you go to a very nice restaurant, you will find in some of the top restaurants around the world that, strangely enough, you won't find tomato ketchup on the table, or mustard, or even salt or pepper. Why not? Well, the chef is a perfectionist. The chef is an expert. The chef has created the food to be eaten the way they require you to eat it. It does not need any additional seasoning. It does not need any additional flavoring. It is to be eaten as is. They have already embedded the flavor into the food as it's being made. It's not bolted in or on as an afterthought after the fact. It's there from the get-go. It's in the food. Another way of thinking about it, because we're not all chefs in fancy 5-star restaurants, is you want to make a chocolate cake. Now, you can take an ordinary vanilla sponge and put some chocolate frosting on it, and to the outside world it will look pretty much like a chocolate cake until you bite into it and then are disappointed. If you want to make a chocolate cake properly, mix in the chocolate when you're making the cake. Bake it in. That's what we mean by embedding in design. Don't do it as an afterthought. Don't do it as an add-on. Don't do it as a bolt-on. Embed it in your design. Privacy should be an essential component of your delivery. It shouldn't be something that you say, oh, by the way, thanks very much for that, and would you like us now to keep your data safe? We don't have to. Would you like us to? Think about how you would trust that organization if they asked you that question. The assumption is privacy is an integral part of your business and the service delivery that you offer. But what is crucial isn't just building it into your designs. It's doing so without diminishing the functionality. Privacy should not be at the expense of something else, or vice versa. What we actually mean is data privacy should be what's called fully functional. What do we mean by fully functional? Well, fully functional is an interesting concept. Have a look at this picture on the right-hand side. To us, as the outside observer, we can see that actually both people are correct. Their perspectives are perfectly fine. The one on the left believes he's looking at a 6. The one on the right believes they're looking at a 9. And they're both right. Yet, to the individuals concerned, only one of them is right. And for one of them to be right, the other one must be wrong. This is what's called a zero-sum example. One has 0, the other one has 100, or has everything. It's all or nothing. For one to be correct, the other must be wrong. Which is ironic because we both know that both of them are right. What we want to move towards, though, is what's called positive sum, not zero-sum. This is otherwise known as win-win. When it comes to data and data privacy, we want to make sure that it is a win-win scenario. We don't want data privacy at the expense of something else, nor do we wish to give up data privacy in favor of something else. We want to accommodate all legitimate objectives. So if someone raises a point in a discussion and says, well, that's all well and good, but that's going to be incredibly expensive and we can't afford it, well, that might be a legitimate point. But what we don't want to do is say, well, we will now, as a result, not pursue data privacy because we can spend the money better elsewhere. We want to look for an opportunity to go, right, how do we make this win-win? How do we accommodate what is required and make everyone a winner? I'll give you a practical example of how this can sometimes show up in the world. We're looking at things, for example, such as POPI and PIA. Now, we're mostly familiar with POPI these days as a result of training such as this, but many of us are unfamiliar with PIA, which is funny because PIA came into existence 20 years ago. At face value, PIA and POPI run at cross purposes. POPI is the protection of personal information, and PIA is the promotion of access to information. So you might think, well, how do we protect something at the same time as promoting access to it? But if you give it some more careful consideration, what you'll realize is the two things are actually very, very connected. The best way to support promotion and access is by keeping it safe. If something is kept safe and protected, it doesn't matter if people have access to it because it's safe. Some practical real-world examples of this would be a museum. If you put a picture on display, it's there so people can see it. That's its whole purpose. If people couldn't see the picture or the painting, what's the point having it? So the only way you can promote access to it is by keeping that painting or picture very safe. So you put lots of security in place to prevent it being stolen or damaged. Another way of thinking about it would be if you have a very fast car and you would like to drive it very fast, you can only really do that if you have very good brakes. How fast would you drive your sports car if you knew the brakes were faulty? The answer, not very. So access and prevention are two sides of the same coin. And that would be a classic example of win-win. We could protect the Mona Lisa by letting no one see it, but then that would defeat the object of having the thing in the first place. Let's protect and share. Otherwise known as being accessible and protected. It's not either or. We don't want something to be accessible or protected. It's accessible and protected. Then it's fully functional. Now it's fully functional and protected. We want to make sure that the people who are actually using the data, the purpose of the data in the first place, is thought about, because ultimately, if we don't think about the people using the data, well then we're going to have a problem. So a good question to start with is, whose data is it anyway? Yes, it may be data that you have acquired or collected over time, or using for a perfectly legitimate purpose or reason. But remember, ultimately, it's somebody else's information, and it belongs to them. You may only have access to it for a limited period of time, for a limited purpose. It's theirs. You're just looking after it. So always bear that in mind. Whatever purpose, whatever process you're using their personal information for, it is their personal information. So always build your systems and approaches with the user, with the owner of the data in mind. Keep their rights, keep their interests uppermost, because they are. Without them, without their data, you actually have nothing. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. If you lose the ability to speak to or communicate with that individual, they are no longer going to be your customer. So their rights, their interests are paramount. The best way to ensure this is, again, make sure you have strong privacy defaults built into your systems and processes. Much like the brakes on your sports car, the privacy defaults, the quality of security in your business is directly attributable to the number of customers you will have. You will find very few people will want to entrust any of their information to a company or organization that does not have good privacy policy or practices. Would you? Would you entrust your personal information to an organization that you could not trust with the information to keep it safe and secure? I don't think so. So have strong privacy defaults. That will protect your business and protect your customer base. And empower the people who are using your devices, who are using your services, who are using your platforms, who are using your business, by giving them user-friendly options. Don't make privacy complicated or hard to use or a pain. Make it easy, make it friendly. Don't make it a chore. Now, given the fact we're trying to keep things safe and secure and private and confidential and so on and so forth, you may consider this next topic to be slightly unusual. Why would we want to be visible and transparent when it comes to keeping data safe and secure? Well, remember, this is all about giving assurance to all stakeholders, and all stakeholders are important when it comes to privacy. That's everything from the person whose information it is, to the staff you have working for you, to your third-party suppliers, your contractors, anybody who's connected with your business. Okay? All of you have a stake in your business. That's why you deal with them. If you operate according to the stated promises and objectives that you set out for your business, people trust you more. Simple as that. Because think of the alternatives. Either you don't have any stated promises or objectives, in which case no one really knows what you stand for or why you're there or what you're doing. In which case, who would you rather work with? Someone who has stated promises and objectives, or someone who doesn't really know what they're doing or why they're there? Or, even worse, you're a business that has stated promises and objectives, but you don't follow them. That is far worse. You're seen to be someone who doesn't even do what they say they do. Visibility and transparency. It keeps us all honest. Don't be afraid of being visible. Don't be afraid of being transparent. Say what you do, and then do what you say. And by being open and transparent, and by encouraging independent people to come in and verify from the outside, external auditors, external assessors, that type of thing, that again keeps us on track. It's very easy when you are in the business or doing something to think, well, hang on, what I'm doing must be right, it's fine. Because you have a vested interest. You have sort of what's called production blindness. But get someone in from outside, get a third opinion, get them to have a look at what you've done and say, are you actually doing what you think you're doing? Are you operating according to your standards, your stated promises and objectives? Are you doing what you say you do? And this also applies to people you work with and work for. Trust them, but verify. It never hurts to just double check to make sure that everything is what it's meant to be. Trust is vital in the world, but always make sure you verify and double check. Go back to the 1, 10, 100 principle. If you don't double check something, then you open the door to having to correct something. Trust, but verify. This section of the presentation is now going to be on some more practical real-world examples. And I've used these and created these simply to give you some practical demonstrations of things that we can all relate to. And while these things might seem a bit esoteric and not directly connected with data privacy, bear with me, you'll see how they go. So the first one I want to talk about is what I call the fridge garage paradox. Now, close your eyes and picture what your fridge and garage look like, the ones you have at home. Okay? And don't think about what they look like from the outside. I want you to think about what they look like inside. Now, your fridge and your garage have many things in common. They're both used for storage. There's lots of stuff in there. Okay? You have a wide variety of items in both of them. And the types of items you have vary quite widely as well. They're not all the same thing. And in both of them, some things you'll keep for a short period of time, other things will be kept for a much longer period of time. Some of the items in both will belong to different people in the household. Some belong to you, some belong to other people. But both your fridge and your garage belong to you. You are the custodian of both. You are the one who fills them, you're the one who empties them, you're the one who looks after them. What I want you now to do is now ask this question. If they're both so similar, why do they look so different? Why does your fridge look like this? Busy, full, lots of different things. It's not exactly itemized like a library, but you can find out where things are. Everything has its place and purpose. Okay? You might even say it's visible and transparent. But if that's your fridge, and you filled it, and you've maintained it, why does your garage look like this? Cluttered, messy, things everywhere, stuff in boxes, you don't know what's in the boxes, you can see things you can't reach, you can reach things you can't tell what they are, there's just stuff piled everywhere. Now, if we're being honest, our approach to data is no different. Most of our laptops, our personal devices, our cell phones will resemble what's on the right. You'll probably only ever delete things from your cell phone when that little message pops up periodically saying memory running low or storage space running low. And then you'll delete a whole bunch of old photographs and files and documents you didn't need anymore and never did in the first place and free up some space. On the other hand, imagine if your laptop was more like your fridge. So the question you want to ask yourself is, well, how is my fridge so different from my garage? Well, it really comes down to how you use the thing. Your garage you tend to just throw stuff into because it's out of sight, out of mind. Your fridge you're in and out of 5, 6, 7, 8 times a day. And the contents of your fridge is food. You're going to eat it. So you want it kept clean and tidy and safe and secure. Whereas what's in your garage, you really don't care that much about. Everything in your fridge has a sell-by date. Now, you may not stick to the sell-by date, but it has one. And we all know eventually that stuff needs to go in the bin. And eventually it will end up there. Stuff in the garage will stay in your garage until the end of time. So what we want to do, guys, is really simple. We want to start changing our approach and mentality. Maintaining our fridge is not very hard. We do it all the time. Imagine we could now convert our garage to be more like our fridge. Let's take it from the sort of clean example on the left-hand side to the lovely example on the right. Still the same items, they're still there, they're just better organized, better filed, better structured, better positioned. And the end result is we've created not only a nice tidy environment, but we've created a whole new room in our house that we didn't have before. And this speaks to some of the fringe benefits of keeping your garage like your fridge or keeping your data tidy. There are many extra benefits which I'll unpack just now about doing so. But when you hear me talk in the future about your fridge or your garage, now you know what I mean. Let's try and move your garage to be more like your fridge. A good first step to doing that is what's called minimization. And in keeping with the spirit of minimization, let's try and give it a nice simple definition. This is keeping the smallest amount of information for the shortest time possible. If we can do this, we're on to a winner. So let's have an example. Let's imagine you have 100 items, 100 boxes, 100 files, 100 storage units, whatever it happens to be. You have 100 of them. And a bit like your garage, they don't really have an expiry date. The stuff that's in there, you just got, and you don't really know how long you're going to keep it for, so you just will. Well, what that means is that given an infinite amount of time, everything's at risk because something sometime will eventually happen to one or all of those things. So having 100% risk is not good. You ask anybody in the insurance, if it's a guaranteed risk, you'll find it very hard to get insurance. So let's try and minimize the risk. Let's reduce down to the smallest amount of information we can hold for the shortest time period possible. So let's just try an experiment. What if we take the 100 items we have, and let's just impose a couple of rules. Well, rule 1, let's reduce down what we actually need. So we do a quick assessment and we discover that we can delete some unnecessary parts of our data. And then once we've done that, let's impose a time limit for how long we keep some of that data for. And let's not be draconian. Let's not try and do everything. Let's not try and cut everything by half. That might be very hard. Let's just do something simple. Let's just reduce down by 30%. So let's reduce down by 30% what information we have. And then let's reduce down by imposing a time limit on 30% of it. So we can still keep some of it forever, but let's just reduce some of it and put a time limit on it. If we do that, we get quite a startling reduction. We get rid of 30% of stuff we don't need in the first place, which immediately makes our risk down to 70%. And then of that 70% that we do have, well, let's say, well, we don't need to keep this forever, so let's apply 30% time limit. And now we end up with our risk reduced by more than 50% by doing very, very simple process. Now, let's try and give this a practical example in the real world. And the good news is, one of the companies I've done some work with are going through this exact process. Here's a little case study on minimization. And as I go through this, think about how you could apply this logic and process to your own business. The business in question estimates that they use 22 boxes of paper per month. Now that's a lot of paper, but they're a traditional business and they have always used lots of paper. They're a paper-based business. If you work out the math, that equates to more than 1 million pieces of paper per year. That's a lot of paper. Okay. Interestingly, 95% of all the paper that they actually use stays within the business. It doesn't actually go anywhere. 5% of it does. It goes off to clients or suppliers or other third parties. But the vast majority, 950,000 sheets of paper, stay within that business every year. So that's a lot of paper. Now think, what if we actually digitized this? What if we didn't use paper at all, and we found a way of using something else? What would that look like? Well, let's not worry about what it looks like. Let's worry about what it's going to feel like. What does it feel like most on the bottom line? If we could get rid of paper, that business would have saved, or will save, 65,000 Rand per year just in not buying the paper. Then, as they're not having to use paper, they no longer need to pay 10 cents a copy, plus toner, and etc., etc., etc. So they can save another, let's be charitable, 75,000 Rand per year. Plus also, there's the extra fringe benefits of not having to have numerous printers and photocopiers and printer cartridges in the space in the first place, and then all the space that's then freed up by not having those things there, and the need to service them and equip them and repair them and maintain them and hire them even. And then let's worry about the storage, because obviously all that paper needs to go somewhere, and after years of producing 1 million pieces of paper a year, they've run out of storage in their building, so they now have to use external storage. And that external storage comes at a cost. Again, being charitable, let's just call that 72,000 Rand, or 6 grand a month. So just before we even get into the technical detail of all the other savings that we could make, we're going to save 209,000 Rand per year just on paper and paper-related storage. Oh, and you're going to be more POPI safe. Right there is a classic example of win-win. It's safer and cheaper than what you're currently doing. Win-win. Or you could choose not to incorporate POPI and privacy into your business and pay 209,000 Rand a year extra that you don't need to. The choice is entirely up to you. But remember, that's just 3 high-level, easily identifiable line items on a spreadsheet. What's the time-saving cost? That's incalculable. All the time now that doesn't need to be spent ordering the paper, having the paper delivered, allocating the paper, storing the paper, filling the photocopiers, clearing the paper jams, having the photocopiers serviced, having the photocopiers cleaned, paying for the photocopiers, paying for the printers, paying for the ink cartridges, taking all the paperwork, storing all the paperwork while it's on site, keeping it safe while it's on site, taking the paperwork off site to a secure storage place, finding someone to go and then find that paperwork in the future when it might be required, and the time it takes to go and find the box, find the file, find the piece of paper, bring it back to the office, and then take it back to storage again. All that time, effort, and money. If we apply some minimization. And if we apply minimization, what are we doing? Well, we're being preventative. Hopefully now you'll begin to see how many of these ideas and theories and concepts tie together. Now, we have covered quite a lot today, so what I'll do is just give you a little summary and try and actually get it down to three key things. If we can work on these three key areas, we can make a big dent in our POPI challenge. A bit like preventing global warming, we want to be good for the environment. Well, you can be good for the environment by doing three nice things. You can reduce, you can reuse, and you can recycle. Now, unfortunately, in data privacy, reusing and recycling is something we actually want to avoid doing. That creates all sorts of problems. But what we can do is the following. We can reduce. Reduce your dependency on personal information. Reduce down what you need, what you use it for, why you have it. Reduce down what you collect in the first place, and then only keep it for as short a period of time as you need to get the job done. If you reduce your usage, your dependency, everything else gets easier. Once you've reduced what you need, then review your existing approach to processing that information. Have you incorporated some privacy by design concepts into your business? Have you thought about whose data it is and why you have it and what you're doing with it and how you store it and how you keep it? Once you've completed that exercise, now maybe it's time to replace those outdated practices. 2 simple steps. Step 1, digitize. If you don't need to have it on paper or hard copy, don't. It just takes up time, effort, space, and money, and imposes additional risk to your business. If you digitize things, that now enables you to go to the next stage, which is to be digitalized. And now you can do everything electronically. Do you really need to print out a document to sign it when you can sign it electronically? Do you even need the document at all? Hopefully, this presentation has given you some food for thought. We haven't gone into details of POPI. Why? You're leaders. You guys will primarily not be doing POPI-related activities on a daily basis, but your thoughts, your guidance, your instructions, your leadership will directly influence your business, your employees, your suppliers, and your customers. Think from a principles base, work from the principles, learn the principles, apply the principles in your business. If you do that, you should find that actually POPI compliance isn't a chore, it's a default setting that you naturally adopt in everything that you do. And if that's how your business functions, you won't even have to ever worry about POPI. Privacy by design. Thank you.